Hello, and welcome to On the Real Side. I'm Bob Mover, and my guest today is a very fine musician and a friend. Uh, Currently spending most of his time in Japan, um, and we'll get to that. But we have Mr. Marshall McDonald with us today. Hi, Marshall.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you.
Marshall. Yeah, good to see you too, man. It's funny to think how far apart we physically are from each other right now. You being in Tokyo and me in New York, and we, modern, the wonders of technology. Anyway, Marshall has been a part of a lot of great music for 30, 40 years. Among things that he has been part of were the Count Basie Band, the under the direction of Frank Foster and other people, but playing that lead alto chair and upholding the tradition of that music for 10 years, as well as a long association with Paquito D'Rivera and Dizzy Gillespie's United Nations Orchestra, I think that was called.
United Nation, yes, United Nation.
United Nations Band, which was another all-star group with a lot of wonderful players in it, and Charlie Persip's band. And well, we'll get into all of the numerous recordings that Marshall has been part of. And, he's had a very illustrious career playing all the reeds. And he's a first-class musician and a fine improviser as well. And he has a lot of pedigrees with who we studied with too, so it's interesting to see those things, and we'll be exploring all of that. I would like to also remind you, if you can click a like, give us a like, and become a subscriber. That helps us more than you may realize, but it's a very helpful and useful thing for us, and we do appreciate it when you can click like and subscribe. Marshall grew up in Pittsburgh, and there must have been something in the water in Pittsburgh because so many brilliant people. I mean, there are a lot of cities that had some brilliant people, but Pittsburgh, it was a land of Strayhorn, Ahmad Jamal, Errol Garner, Art Blakey, the Turrentine brothers, and that was a lot of brilliance around Pittsburgh, and one of the most brilliant families is Marshall McDonald's very interesting and illustrious family. And you're writing a book about your family.
I'm just starting it because all of my friends tell me the story needs to be told. The interesting thing about both sides of my family, my mother's family, the Womacs, and then my father's side, the McDonalds, each side of the family were very high achievers, as they called them. When I joined the Basie band, it was first Frank Foster that got me in as a sub, but it was Grover Mitchell was the leader. Later hired me permanently to play in the band, and then when I told him where I was from, I started to tell him my family. He said, I remember your family, the Womacs. They were always high achievers. They were always accomplishing a lot of stuff. It was it's an interesting story. And I'll be happy to talk about it.
Well, there was, let's just say to start with, it began with with your dad, who was Alonzo McDonald,
Right.
who wanted to be a doctor really, and because of the racial situation, ended up to being a dentist. But he became more than, well, like you said, with the overachiever or high achievement level. He wasn't just a dentist, but he became the head of dentistry, of oral dental surgery, and a very distinguished one, and was even the chief mentor to the fellow that became the chief dentist for the armed forces. Even he
Yes.
was, he was a very well known, and I think it's an interesting story, also because of the racial aspects that a lot of people don't realize how it's very recent. It's still not far away from that.
Well, we're still going through it today, I think. We're having a slight reversal of times, if you will, political times. And my father had served in World War II, as you noted, and he came back. My mother had already got a master's degree in sociology. Her father, who was a Pullman porter, which was a good job for a black man at the time, so he traveled a lot. And my mother got to travel to New York and other places, actually, so she had a more worldly view. It was during World War II, so she told me that she had gone to Washington, D.C. to help support the war effort. Her father actually told her, you probably need to get a degree, and that's the reason she went to the University of Pittsburgh and ended up getting a master's degree in sociology, of all things. And her brothers were also educated, highly educated. She used to tell me stories about watching Earl Garner practice at the school. There was a great music school. I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry right now. But that was one of the reasons there were so many musicians coming up. There was a teacher who taught all of these young students music. And there was a myth, I remember, around the world that jazz is natural and jazz comes to people and black people can just play jazz. And my mother was saying, no, these people practiced all day long. I used to watch them practice when I was at school.
Right, it wasn't just natural rhythm, they used to say, which was absurd. And you did start early, and your parents were also very familiar with classical music.
Yes.
Your father played classical piano, didn't he? And as a
Yes.
hobby.
Yes.
And I think you had some excellent teachers. I think the head of well, you can tell me who they were, but I believe the head of the Pittsburgh Symphony, lead
Yes.
clarinet, first clarinet.
Yes, the principal clarinetist of what my father had done is he wanted everyone to have music lessons. It was very important to him. So my sister had violin lessons, and my brother just really excelled at a young age with his brilliant mind. And so he was studying at Carnegie Mellon. It was Carnegie Tech at the time, actually, back then. And he was taking lessons there. So my father took me there when I was young. And the first class I had was a eurythmics classes. Do you remember those, Bob, where they teach you rhythm and time and the pulse of music and all that stuff when you're little?
Rhythm band. You mean
Yeah,
in like kindergarten?
like exactly, Steph. It was at Carnegie Mellon, and they call it eurythmics, and that was my first class. But one of the best things that ever happened to me was my father took me to a seminar about what instrument I wanted to play, and for some reason, Bob, I wanted to play oboe. I do not know why. Maybe I heard it on TV. I don't know what it was. But a woodwind person told my father, he said, well, oboe is a kind of a how do you put it? I'm not obscure instrument really. It's not that much work for it. But he said if your son starts on clarinet, he'll be able to move to the other woodwinds later, which was the most pivotal thing that ever happened to me because he was so right. Because I picked up saxophone in ninth grade because I wanted to play in the jazz band. My father joked about it because he said, "Oh, saxophone sounds like a tugboat. I don't want you playing saxophone." But he went out and he bought me a used saxophone, because he was my dad. And Bob, I basically taught myself how to play it because, the armature and the fingerings. I had a little book and I just kind of taught myself how to play saxophone.
But you had already had some clarinet formal studies, right? By the time you started to play the saxophone.
Oh, yes. It was Thomas Thompson was my first teacher, the principal clarinetist of the Pittsburgh Symphony. And he gave me such a fine foundation from the start. Then he left to do some other things, and then Mr. William Ballawatcher took his place at Carnegie Mellon, a master's degree in clarinet, and he took me through all the classics. And by the time I was in eighth grade, I was playing the Mozart clarinet concerto.
So you were that's quite an accomplishment. And you played it with your father accompanying you, right?
That's right. He used to sit there at the piano with my brother and myself, and then and he was a trumpet player before he went to the war. And I guess a lot of people took piano lessons when they were younger back in those days. It seems like,
Your dad
at
played
least.
trumpet.
Yeah, my dad played trumpet before, and then of course, he had all the classical piano. So he would accompany me and practice with me on the parts. And I remember him always saying, "Sing, boy, sing. You gotta sing the don't just play the notes, sing the notes."
That's a wonderful idea. That's what we're telling everybody now. You know, that's the best. I think that's the best advice you can give anybody really on an instrument. Start out singing and don't stop.
Right.
No, I think that. So now his taste in music, did he look down upon jazz, or how did he feel about dance? What was dance music at the time? Things like Basie or Fletcher Henderson, or the popular black music at the time. How did he feel about that stuff?
When I was coming up, it's true. He had turned his back on the black culture for some reason, and we're not sure why. Whether the war was traumatizing, or well, no doubt that the War II in Japan and what he saw was traumatizing. I understand his mother told me before he went to the war, he listened to jazz music and did that like everybody else did. But when he came back, he only listened to classical music. We're not sure why, but of course. PTSD. They didn't even have a name for it then. They called it war. What did they call it? Shell shocked, I think, Bob.
I think they called it shell shock.
and and people said his mother, who lived to be 99, whose father was a slave master. Actually, her father was a slave master, and her mother was a
slave master. No,
slave master. She was born in the late 1800s on a plantation after emancipation. Yes, correct.
right, but her father was not. She was a black woman, right?
She was a very light-skinned looking woman who could have passed to look maybe like you. The color of her skin was like yours.
So her biological father then was the master of the plantation, sort of like that kind of a.
That's correct. His name was Mr. Morgan, and she had his picture on the wall at her house in Pittsburgh, which was a fascinating dynamic. Me coming up at a time during the 60s, during the Black Civil Rights Movement, and to know that, and she told me the story, that a slave master was on the picture of her house because it was her father, and she knew her
Did he stay
father.
alive for long? Did he live for quite a while? Or did she?
She lived to be 99. I don't know how long her father lived though.
So he was your grandfather.
He would be my
He was your
great
mother.
grandfather. Great grandfather.
She was your great grandmother. She was your mother's grandmother.
Mother's yes, that would be my father's mother. So
Your father's
she was
mother.
my that was my grandmother who and so that would be my great grandfather was a white slave master. And what's interesting to me is a lot of people think this history is long ago in some mysterious place, but it's not. I mean, this was recent times enough that she told me all of the stories about what she lived through. How she told me how she picked cotton and how it hurt her hands, and they paid her 10 cents a day to do it.
Wow. Even though her father was the slave master.
That's right. So he favored her, but the wife was very angry about that. So at one point, I think she told me she sent her, who we called Gaga, Fanny, sent her off the plantation some other place. That's a true story. The wife got angry about the whole situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you could think that she did, though. He probably had a few other paramours. That would,
Yeah. Yes.
well, I mean,
We're laughing about it because we don't know what else to do. You know?
right. I think that it's yeah, it's something. So then, because I'm thinking now that's his history. So, oh yeah, I mean, one would have to give it some thought. So he actually, when he came back from World War II, though, he wanted nothing to do with jazz or with black music in general, and he wanted to be a doctor, right? That was his real ambition.
No, not at first. It was my mother who suggested he go to school. She told him that the one reason she was attracted to him because he was so handsome, and honestly, even my wife looked at his young picture and said, "Oh yeah, he was a good-looking guy."
See where you get, uh,
So, so after the war, my mother told me, of course, there weren't any men around in America. So when the men came back, one of the things that the woman was supposed to do was meet a man and get married. It was 1945, 1946, 47, and that's what most of her friends did. Uh, he was a very handsome man and very charming. My grandmother told me after the war he used to just isolate himself and keep his fist kind of clenched all of the time. But my mother said he was a hardworking man. He became a Pittsburgh police motorcycle cop. My cousin told me he was the first black motorcycle cop of Pittsburgh, which I didn't know that until he told me that. They used to ride Harley Davidson, so they were very famous. He worked at a jewelry store downtown, she told me, and a hardworking man. She finally suggested to him, why don't you go back to college on a GI Bill? And he did. And he went to school, and that's when he decided he wanted to be a physician. And they told him no. Uh, I should use the words that they described it to him later. So he switched to try to be an oral surgeon. He used to drive his Harley Davidson down to the dental school, my cousin told me, which I didn't know that either. So it was kind of a big bike. You can imagine that. Here's this man driving the Harley Davidson police car. And he went in I'll keep it brief. He went in to ask about, joining the dental school. And honestly, the phrase they said was, why does a nigger want to be a dentist for?
what, they didn't realize you got teeth? I mean,
Well, that was the time period. I think the late 50s, if I remember, the middle 50s, maybe 1952 or something like that.
now, Miles Davis' father was a dentist, and
Yes,
he became quite a wealthy dentist, as the
that's right.
story goes. He ended
That's
up
right.
owning quite a few things in the town, and really became. Um, now, your father, did he? So he became an oral surgeon. He did become a surgeon.
He became an oral surgeon, the first oral surgeon in Pittsburgh, one of the very few black oral surgeons still in American history. He worked his way up. He had two offices. Like my mom said, he worked hard. He had two different offices. But she told me he was always upset because he didn't have all of the patients like the white doctors have. So he couldn't make the money the white doctors were making at the same time.
Um, and insurance was not a big thing at that time either.
No, 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 no,
That
no.
was relatively new. I mean,
Right.
because we want to mention that because I think some kids that watch this show have no idea, like what. Oh, well, they must have had insurance or what? Oh no, there was,
No, no. Let's just imagine the times. I understand the times. White people were not going to go to black dentists. That just was not part of the culture in the 50s. I remember meeting another gentleman whose father, I can't remember his name now. We were discussing this. His father was also a dentist. His father was a Jewish white dentist in uh, close to Carnegie Hall, he told me. I can't remember the person's name. I'm sorry. It's probably not important. But he said his father changed the game a little bit because a lot of musicians in New York couldn't go find a dentist. The black musicians, they couldn't get a dentist. So his father decided, I'm going to treat these black musicians who aren't allowed to go into the white dentist office. Now, he said he lost a lot of money because of that, because once the white people found out that he was treating black people, they said, we're not going to that dentist anymore. But he kept it up, and he became well known as this is the doctor, the dentist, where the black people can go get their teeth fixed.
oh, so he was quite a brave soul.
He was. I just can't remember who it was.
Now that's an interesting thing because you also didn't start to become a musician. I know that you played clarinet, and then you heard Barney Bigard and Louis Armstrong, and those things, and then you decided that you didn't want to play classical music, that you wanted to play jazz, and also the saxophone, right? And
That's
so you were about what, 12 or 13 at that point when that happened?
Yeah, like I said, my father only played classical music around the house. He had put
Right.
he put all these speakers all in the living room and the bathrooms and everywhere, so the music was always going all the time. When I drove to the hospital with him on the weekends where he did surgery, I'll tell you this side story because it was kind of cool. I was always very proud of my father because when you get to the hospital, everyone seemed to, gave him such respect. Oh, good morning, Dr. McDonald. Dr. McDonald, good to see you. And he'd be, oh, good to see you, Dr. Russell. Good to see you, doctor. So as a child, I made this joke. I was like, good morning, doctor. Yes, doctor. Nice to see you, doctor. Good to see you, doctor. So I mean, it was just funny to me because it was a whole different world than I
It
was
was like
used
the
to.
Marx Brothers, you know. Yes, doctor, my son, doctor, this is Dr. Doctor. You hear, I would say, hear Groucho saying that.
I love Groucho, right?
Yeah, but it reminds me of that. And so then though you went out as a chemistry and biology major or student. You went to Lafayette College, which I
Yeah.
in Pittsburgh, and that was well, I believe that's where you started to get more serious about music. But the point I was making was that you didn't like a lot of cats. You know, I was 13 and 14, and I knew I was never going to do anything else. But I think you wanted to please your father, or for whatever reason.
He was very strong, man, and my brother was supposed to be the one who went into music, but my brother didn't end up finishing music school, so he joined the Air Force Academy Drum and Bugle Corps, which was a very high level organization. He could really play. I was
Yeah,
going
your
to tell you the
brother's
story.
10 years older than you, right?
Yes, 9 years older. Yes,
9 years,
8 years older, something like that.
but older.
I was going to tell you the little story. I found an old 8-track tape. You remember those, Bob? The 8 tracks.
Yeah.
And it was hidden in the library with all this other music my dad had, and it was Louis Armstrong, man. It had Mac the Knife on it, a whole bunch of stuff. Boy, I just fell in love with that. I couldn't listen to it enough. I said to my mom, "What is this stuff?" And she was so excited because she loves jazz. That's jazz. So she brought me a Pete Fountain record, and she said, "Don't tell your father. Take it upstairs and listen to it by yourself."
Really?
So I tried to, what I did was I just tried to imitate whatever the clarinet player was doing by ear. I had no idea what they were doing, but I just tried to imitate it. You know what I mean? So the first way I learned to play a jazz solo in high school was because my teachers didn't know anything about jazz. Is Bob, what I did, I saw someone had a written solo on another piece of music, right? So I said, that's a good idea. So I recorded the stage band for my solo and I took it home and I kept listening to it, Bob, and I decided I'm going to sing what I think I might play. I'm going to sing it, and then I would sing it note by note, figure it out on the saxophone, and then I would write it down. I eventually wrote out a whole solo by singing, listening, and it worked. I went to
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's um, actually that's funny because I did something very similar to that. I was about 12. Uh, I was 13. That's right when I started to play the horn, and I had been singing along with records and everything, and I already was in love with jazz. And when I had a little band, Duffy Jackson and I were in junior high school together, and Duffy was already playing with his dad's big band. Duffy was the son of Sonny Jackson, and I know
Right.
that you have some Duffy. You ran into Duffy in the world,
Yeah, we played he was a drummer when I was playing with the Illinois Jacquet Big Band, and he also played with Lionel Hampton a few times too. Wow.
right? So we all have our Duffy Jackson stories.
Definitely.
Duffy and I were these two 13-year-olds weighing over 200 pounds each that would wear dark glasses and walk down the hall trading fours on back screws. And doing that. But anyway, the thing was that we had this little band that would play together, and I had copied a couple of Charlie Parker licks and some Stan Getz and Lester Young licks. But I would sing. I'd say, "Well, what am I going to play on something?" And so I would kind of like sing a solo. I learned to sing some blues choruses that I made up myself, and then I would play those. when we
Oh,
played.
wow.
Then I started to improvise on my own once in a while after I had the singing down and I could play them. Then I'd start to improvise on my own singing. I'd
Right.
change it a little bit, and so we had a similar approach, you and
Hmm.
I, to the beginnings of that. That's an
Right.
interesting thing that we both did that, and it was
That
so
is interesting.
vocally oriented too, because both of us, both you and I, one characteristic I think that our music shares is we both have very, very nice sounds. We get really nice tones on our
Right.
instruments, and like it's like a real consideration for us. I think that we both, it's a priority in your playing and in mine that we both have that. And a lot of players, especially when I've been doing these clinics and master classes and this kind of things, a lot of the college cats and the people like that, they're running all over the instrument. They got all this and that. But it's like Fred said, "Lady, can you sing me a song?"
Right.
And that's just not there. So I find that interesting that that's how you started to play. So you took your Pete Fountain oriented style and just made up things and sang them as solos. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and
Like,
then he got me the saxophone. I had a saxophone solo. That was the one I wrote out by playing it on the saxophone. He eventually bought me a nice little Yamaha. He was always supportive of my career, no matter what. And that's very important to have parents that stand behind you like that. So,
oh yeah, no, it is, and it's nice that he did that. That he didn't give you a hassle about it. I mean that even though he wasn't, he probably would have liked you to pursue the classical music more.
he was really focused on the fact that there weren't many black musicians in classical music, so he would have been so excited about the McGill brothers. I met Anthony McGill, the principal of the Metropolitan, when I was at Buffet Crampon. He's the black gentleman who's the principal clarinetist of the Philharmonic Orchestra, and my father would have been so happy to see that because it was his dream to see, because he always said, there should be more black musicians in this music, so.
Well, there was, Albert Daly, great pianist, said he disappointed a lot of people because he was kind of a prodigy, and
Hmm.
people were ready. They were grooming him to become the next Andre Watts, who
Hmm.
was the really the first black pianist,
Right.
classical pianist, to make that breakthrough, that to cross that barrier. And then Albert said, and then he heard Bud Powell, and that was the end of of everybody else's dream for him. That was it. But
Right.
so and your brother, was he oriented toward jazz? I mean, he joined the marching band. He did this, but was he more into classical music as well, or?
He was in the classical in the 60s. He was a child of, he was coming up in the 60s, so we started an organization called SMAP, Sunshine Music and Peace, I believe it was. And it was like a rock. This is a true story. You can Google it. It was a rock venue. He and his friends started a rock venue in East Liberty, Pittsburgh, where all these bands would come in, including Miles Davis came there and played and hung out and stuff. And it did rather well for a couple of years. My father was horrified, You can imagine this. He had bumper stickers, and my brother was something else, man. You would have liked him. You two would have been sitting around all night long talking and telling stories for sure.
Yeah, he was. He sounds like something. He died relatively. Uh,
Yeah, he passed away just a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago. It's just 70 years old. Yeah, he had suffered with diabetes for a long time in his life.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
And your sister also was a fine musician as well, wasn't she? They had some association with Quincy Jones, or
Oh no, not my sister. That was the Janice Wilkins, I think, who my brother went to the Carnegie Mellon Honors Band. She's a black trombonist who went on to a jazz career with Quincy Jones, but they both played in the Pittsburgh Honors Band. My sister went to medical school as a black woman in the 60s, so you can imagine
right?
that. So,
And she became a renowned doctor, right? She was.
yeah, she graduated from Johns Hopkins University. She's still with us. She's retired now. She's down in Florida. Another brilliant mind. I think I must have fallen on my head something when I was young, Bob.
Well, jazz does that to you. I think I had a terrible spill myself. and I believe that that's what that kind of happens. I think that may be the problem there. That
But you asked me about how I got into jazz. I wanted to tell people what helped me finally. I did have some J.B. Abersol records and I learned a couple scales, but I basically didn't know anything, Bob. You know what I mean? The reason I went to the pre-med school is because I was afraid to tell my father I wanted to go to Berkeley. He was that strong of a personality. But my mother wanted me to go to Berkeley, so she was trying to figure out how I could get there. But so I did well at first with biology. Then I got sick. I got some terrible infection the second semester and kind of had to lay off of school for a while. But I was
by the
playing
way,
in the stage
that's for
band.
biology.
Right. I was playing in the stage band at Lafayette, and this guy Mark Kirk came in to play. I don't know if you know Mark.
I knew him in Miami, actually.
Oh, okay. So, and I took a
Phil
few
Woods,
lessons.
right?
I took a few lessons with Mark, and he wrote out the Phil Woods thing about the minor scale 1 through 9,
Dorian mode.
and then the diminished. He put the diminished, and then he put the major. I mean, he wrote this on paper. First, I brought it. The funniest thing was not funny, but the deepest thing. I brought all these Jamie Allison books and all these books I had right to his house, and he threw them on the floor and he said, "Never bring those books back to my house again." That's the first thing he said. So he said, "You're not learning anything from those books. You can't even play a scale," he said. So he wrote out this exercise and said, "I just need you to learn what the 1 through 9, why 1 is D and 2 is E." And he explained all that to me. And of course, at that time, it was overwhelming. You know what I'm talking about? Because no
Yeah.
one had really told me that. And I figured out this way when I came back to Pitt. I call it the play and say method because I didn't know the scales, Bob. So I would sit there in the practice room for 6 hours, like play D, and I would say D, and I go 1, then I play E, and I go E2, and I did that for just hours and hours going through all 12 keys, Bob, to learn these scales. But no classical teacher told me to do that.
Well, that's very interesting because I was playing entirely by ear, and I actually got fairly good. I copied a lot of Charlie Parker and Lester Young, and I didn't stare
Hmm.
guess. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I knew that songs had a key, and I was playing with Ira Sullivan. I was listening to Ira Sullivan and hang out with him, and I'd sit
Wow.
in on the last tune of the last night of the last night. But now and then he'd let me play a couple tunes, or and I had a few tunes I could play more or less. But then I was in this little high school all-star band in Miami with some good players. Bill Pierce was in it, and Mark Colby, very good tenor player from
Oh,
Miami.
from Maynard's band.
Yeah, and he was on Maynard's band, exactly. And Duffy was the drummer, and I
Wow.
was I was the weakest guy in the band. Melton Mustafa was on the band.
Oh, I know. I knew Melton. Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to talk to you about him too because I know that we have all these people that you and I have in common that a lot of people don't realize how great they were. And I want to get to these people like Melton and and Duffy and Pete Minger
Oh,
and
Petey Minger, we called him.
Minger, man. There wasn't a better trumpet player. I'll tell you, Tom Harrell, as good as he wasn't better than Pete.
Right.
Honestly, and Claudio and Woody Shaw, I'll tell you, Pete was one of the greatest trumpet players I ever heard.
Oh man, it was such a pleasure to play with him in the Basie band. I was lucky to get in there when Frank Foster was still running the band and meet and play with these guys. And it sent me back to my room practicing I upped it to about 8 to 12 hours a day. You know
Yeah,
what I'm
well,
saying?
just being around Pete, you got to do that. I had a gig with him. Duffy put a quintet together in Florida once I was down there visiting my mother, and we had a 4-month gig at this club in Coconut Grove with Pete and I were the
Right.
front line, and Duffy on drums, and Dolph Castellano on piano, and a bass
Hmm.
player, Paquito Hernandez was his name. And man, that band was cooking. And just to be in shape for Pete every night, because he was such a great player. I grew every night on that band. He's a little older. I was in my early 20s. At that point, I was already playing pretty well. I'd already played with Vegas and done some time with Chad Baker, but you know,
Wow.
but I mean, I was like 24. But Pete Minger, was 30, and he was ahead of me, and so I learned every night from this guy. And
So I'm curious, Bob. At that time when you were playing well, had you worked out had you gone with the number system, or what was your approach to improvisation? I'm curious about.
well, I was going to say with you like this, like you, let's say I didn't know what I was doing. I played with this high school all-star band, and it's what was called the jazz, oh, JC. It was like the Intercollegiate Jazz Festival. They called that. It was like the IAJE, but it was the first festival. It was in Miami. It was one of the very first. And so this band did a clinic, and we had Phil Woods, Gary McFarland, and Stan Kenton were all listening to the band on a Saturday morning. And it happened to be the morning of the Alan Rock, the jazz DJ who became Bozo the Clown later, recently died. Wonderful man. Wouldn't let me play a solo. I got one solo because we had Mark Colby and Bill Pierce, and they were all seniors, and I was just like a freshman in high school. Duffy and I were the youngest guys in the band. So, but on the morning of the clinic, it was the day of the college boards, and so Mark couldn't make it. None of those guys could do it, and I ended up playing lead alto, which I was the worst reader in the band. But Ira Sullivan, who couldn't read, taught me to read. The best way to read is if you're playing third alto, just listen to the lead alto player's rhythms and play your notes. You don't have trouble reading the notes. You have trouble reading rhythms. That's right. That's true. Well, it's the rhythms that are going to mess you up. So I knew all the rhythms. So I could just change the notes and play lead alto, no problem. And so Phil really, and I could play blues in F. And there was one tune, Poor Devil Blues. And I knew about 60 Charlie Parker phrases on the blues. And that was pretty much, I would then improvise my own based on what he did, which I'm still doing. and Phil heard me and said he had this camp in Pennsylvania, and he wanted to give me, I had no money. My family was, was poor. We were poor Jews, which is really unusual, In fact, Clifford Jordan one time, I told him some story about, he said, "Oh, you grew up in Miami. Your daddy owned a hotel down there?" And I said, "Oh, come on, Clifford. Man, did you have your watermelon today? Come on, man. We don't, you think every Jew you meet is like got a lot of money and this and that. That's ridiculous." I said, "As a matter of fact, we didn't have money and we were very poor. We got evicted a lot. And my life was just pretty, pretty tragic and sad and poor." And he said, "Well, that's good." He thought about it for a second, and he says, "Well, that's good for you. That's good." I said, "What do you mean it's good?" He said, "Well, had your daddy owned a hotel, you'd be playing like."
I was about to say that too. Going through those rough times teaches you the blues and all sorts of stuff. I mean, you don't get the blues living the good life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So that was what happened. But anyway, in answer to your question, because I want to talk about you, the thing is, when I got to Phil's camp, the first lesson that Phil gave us was that lesson, the Dorian mode. Usually I have my horn next to me, and because of my tracheostomy, I can't sing anymore. But it was a Dorian mode from D to E, da 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 da, and then the Crimea River lick coming down, ooh doo doo da da da.
Right,
Down
that's what I got too.
That was that exercise, and I learned that in all the keys, and I realized there are numbers to this. And I had an idea of that because my dad taught me solfeggio when I was a little boy. I already played piano somewhat, and this and that, and I played the guitar. But it all came together when I learned that little exercise.
Right.
It was like a Zen koan. That thing was all of a sudden, I saw the light, and you had the same realization. Isn't that funny? We both had that kind of awareness from that one exercise.
That's right.
It went up to the ninth and down the arpeggio. And then I realized that's all that ever goes on.
It was an eye-opening experience for me. And then I got the book Patterns for Jazz at Pitt, which doesn't write out stuff for you. It just tells you the numbers of the notes, right? You know, 1, 2, 3, 5, 1, 3, 2, 5, stuff like that. And it all started to make sense. Like it was like the world opened up while I'm sitting in this room. I was pretty high, of course, sitting in this room, and it suddenly is like, you know,
I was high too. And the second thing that opened it up for me is Phil gave me a present. Phil said, like right after I learned that exercise, about a week or two later, he said he would spend extra time with me. He told me I could be a very good alto player. I said, be a good alto player someday if I learned to keep my mouth shut. And but he gave me Oliver's Patterns, which was called Patterns for Saxophone, one of the original copies of it.
wow.
Oliver had given a few extra copies, and he gave me one. He gifted me with one, and he told me the best thing about it was it didn't tell you what the changes were. He said you have to figure out what the numbers are and what kind of changes it would fit over. He said that's the way Oliver was so hip that he knew to do that. He didn't spoon feed you anything. You got to figure out where that stuff goes. And so like that was your second thing. First was the Dorian mode to the ninth and down the arpeggio. Second thing, Patterns for Jazz. And you know, Phil said, you know, now you don't want to just play this stuff, but you want to use it as a tool to learn things from. And so it's interesting that you and I both had that those two very same things at the beginning. And so then that became my way of then I got fascinated with the piano, and I would just start playing standards and just keep learning piano and but I had the same breakthrough that you had. I thought of the
Right.
numbers.
I started transcribing Charlie Parker solos too because but after my second year I went back to Pittsburgh and I changed to a kind of a music major, if you will, but there was only one jazz teacher, Dr. Nathan Davis. They didn't really have a jazz department. Jerry Allen was in school when I was there, and Jocelyn Collins and James Johnson, all these people that knew a lot of stuff. But what I started to try to do was like you were saying, I tried to transcribe some Charlie Parker solos by ears, and it took some time for me, but it got better slowly. So I went to the jazz improvisation class with Nathan Davis, and he was playing an F blues, right? I just never forgot this, and he's having people play, and so I played the first chorus of what I had learned off it. Maybe it was "Now's the Time" or one of those tunes, but up, or whatever one solo it is.
No, no, no,
And
no.
then he started yelling at me, play your own solo. And I said, I don't have an own solo. I don't know what to play.